I'm Shona Preston from the Serious Incident Team at Greater Huddersfield CCG, and I'm going to talk about World Sepsis Day, which is on the 13th of September this year. Our organisation normally marks this by an analysis of some of the data and some recommendations around sepsis. This year, we've decided to take a slightly different approach and maybe give some consideration to the patient journey. If you're interested in the topic, can I direct you to either the NICE guidance recommendations from NHS England or the Sepsis Trust, which provides a wealth of information, which is very user-friendly. Just to give you context of sepsis in the United Kingdom, at a conservative estimate, we know that 37,000 people a year die from sepsis. The reason why this is a conservative estimate is it's taken from data and intensive care units. And of course, we know that lots of patients receive care in different settings, and it doesn't take into account the people that have sepsis and survive. So there is a massive fiscal and economic effect of sepsis, but also taking into account the human context, the massive impact it has on those individuals who suffer from sepsis, whatever the outcome, and their families. So in September 2014, I had been seen at my local hospital and diagnosed with gallstones. I was kept in hospital overnight with a plan to have elective surgery about 8 weeks later. I was discharged home, didn't go back to work straight away because quite honestly I felt dreadful. And about a week after having the abdominal symptoms, I had this incredible pain in my right knee. It was very swollen and I felt very hot and unwell. So I waited till my husband got home and then I went back into A&E. And it was a real challenge to explain to the staff this was my knee. It was acute. I hadn't had an accident, hadn't fallen, there was no trauma. Yes, I still felt slightly unwell because of my gallbladder, but it was really my knee that was concerning me. So straight away, there's a differential diagnosis for the team to consider. And we know reflectively looking at serious incidents that this is a theme that often accompanies sepsis, that there are two diagnoses to consider and sometimes it's the sepsis that gets missed. And I also fell into the category of patients who didn't particularly have very abnormal results, a mild temperature, a slightly fast pulse, slightly breathless, but nothing that would be particularly concerning for somebody of my age. Anyway, I was admitted overnight, and fortunately for me, there was a nurse on duty on the ward that I went to who was from an orthopaedic background. She recognised that this was abnormal and got an intervention straight away. Quite a lot of fluid was drained from my knee and septic arthritis was diagnosed. I went to theatre, but subsequently I got septic arthritis in my left knee and then sepsis. I was in hospital for about 5 weeks, a large percentage of that time very critically ill. Here I am. I was lucky enough to go home, and that's in thanks to the care that I received from the NHS. And I'm very grateful for that. I also have to see it within the context of what that meant for my family. I was out of a lot of what was going on, and I understand how difficult it must have been for my family. My little boy found it really difficult. He was looking for me every day and nobody could give him any assurance that I would actually be coming home. I was only 6 months out of clinical practice, so I was looked after by colleagues, and I also recognise that must have been really difficult for them. And I know, speaking to them subsequently, they found it really distressing, and particularly when I was deteriorating very quickly. So I think we always need to keep in mind not only the person that's got the sepsis, it's the wider family and the team that are looking after them. So I left hospital after 5 weeks. I left with a Zimmer frame, a very poor mobility, and I needed to learn to walk again. The main things that I noticed was the absolute overwhelming exhaustion. Really could just sleep all day, but conversely, when it was bedtime on a night, I was awake most of the night with anxiety, worrying that I was going to get sick again, and just general worry about the future and reliving sort of the care episode. And I had noticed brain fog and cognitive delay, for want of a better description. And we do know that 51% of people who leave hospital with sepsis do have some degree of cognitive delay. Those patients that have been on ICU have PTSD, some of them. After about 5 months, I was absolutely determined to get back into work. It was actually a job I'd only been in 6 months. Although I could walk, I couldn't drive. So I had really supportive colleagues who took me backwards and forwards to work. My line manager at that time was, her background was critical care, and she said to me, "You'd really benefit from some counselling." And she was spot on in that, because it gave me a safe space really to talk about the things I didn't want to talk about with family and friends, and to really unpick some of the emotion around what happened to me, and that was great. And I also had a really supportive team around me at that time. And I have a really supportive team around me now who have a clear understanding of what sepsis means. If I'm really honest, when I worked on the labour ward, I looked after women who had sepsis, and they went home, and we were just really pleased as a team. They'd survived, and they could go home with the baby. I never began to realise what a long journey it is for recovery. That feeling of exhaustion lasted for about 18 months. So in my case, it was a long, slow recovery. And also working for the NHS, I was really lucky to go to occupational health. I had some occupational therapy, some additional physio. I had an assessment of my cognitive function, and I know that I've got a mild cognitive delay, but doesn't impact on day-to-day living. Though I have noticed my cognitive ability can be impacted on by tiredness and stress. But I think we could all say that. So I feel really lucky to have come out of sepsis relatively unscathed. Though there is some legacy for me from the sepsis, in that there was such damage to my knees that eventually I would need both knees replacing. It's just a matter of when. And with that, I have increased pain and a reduced mobility. But otherwise, I have a pretty functional life. It's a conscious decision to work 16 hours a week, because I really want to feel like I can contribute to my team and the NHS. But any more than that, I do find quite exhausting. So I guess the key messages that I wanted to just share with you today is that we often concentrate on the acute phase of sepsis and somebody being in a hospital, and actually we really also need to focus on that long recovery for some people and acknowledge that they may be left with some existing comorbidities which are going to impact on their future health. What would I recommend for us as society as a whole, to keep encouraging awareness of sepsis to the general population, so that they know if they're unwell and they've got a certain set of symptoms, to go and access care sooner rather than later. For providers to really embed the Sepsis 6, their news charts, the adapted sepsis news charts, and if they have a suspicion of sepsis, to start that treatment within an hour, ideally, and also for the patient to have the most senior clinical caregiver making their decisions and liaising with other teams. As employers, to recognise that somebody who has sepsis, when they come back to work, is going to need some reasonable adaptations, really, and that they may need some support from occupational health. Co-workers, somebody comes back in your team and they've been critically ill, they're really going to need some support settling back into the workplace, and some understanding that their functionality may be slightly different for a time, or they may never function at a level that they did before. But that doesn't mean that they can't be a functioning member of the team. People commissioning healthcare, to consider psychological support in the community, access to psychological therapies, but with the experts who are really versed in supporting patients after trauma. Consider occupational therapists in the community, physiotherapists. These people and these professionals do exist in a lot of areas in the country, but the data from the Sepsis Trust suggests it can be very patchy depending on geographical location. So that's something that really needs to be considered when planning care packages and commissioning healthcare. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it's given you some food for thought. People have said to me in the past, I was unlucky. I actually turn that on its head. I feel very lucky to have survived my sepsis journey. I don't take my health for granted, and every day since 2014 has been a gift for me, and I recognise that. Thank you.